This piece is a wild ride. I mean, honestly, I'd encourage everybody to check it out. It's called IKEA's Race for the Last of Europe's Old Growth Forests. It just takes a bunch of twists and turns, and the fact that you were really in harm's way personally is just another. I'm glad you're okay based on the insane violence in this story. I mean, talk a little bit about how you even learned about this topic and why you chose to cover it on the ground despite the risks involved.
Yeah, it was something that I found out about a couple of years ago. I was reading in the BBC. There was this news hit about a forest ranger in Romania who'd gotten murdered, and in conjunction with some illegal logging. And in the piece, they mentioned that he was the second forest ranger to be murdered in like a 6-week span, which seemed like a pretty shocking sort of episode of violence for a country that's obviously an EU member state. It's not the sort of place where you would expect that sort of thing to be happening generally. So I read that, started looking into it. Kind of one thing led to led to another, as these things often do. And I found out first that IKEA is the largest private landowner in Romania, and that this illegal logging is happening on a massive scale. And kind of the pieces started falling together, and eventually decided to go out there and do some reporting on the ground.
So your piece opens with a terrifying story not involving you. Could you just take the audience through that? I mean, I think that's a great conduit into the larger topics we'll be discussing.
Yeah, sure thing. It starts out, there were two local documentarians, a director and a videographer, basically working on a project also about illegal logging in Romania, which is obviously a local concern as much as anything. And they've been shadowing this environmentalist named Tiberiu, who is well known in parts of Romania. He's got a big Facebook following, and he over the last 5 years has done a lot of work rooting out illegal logging, confronting loggers, chasing down trucks full of contraband. And so they were shadowing him for 4 days as part of their shoot. And on the final day, they went to go investigate what they assumed was an illegal logging site. They got a tip that there was one. They went to check it out. And when they got there, they obviously found the stumps that they were looking for, and called what they thought, I guess, was the forest ranger to come investigate. And they were greeted instead by 2 cars full of attackers, basically like 15 men wielding bats and axes, who jumped out and just besieged them effectively. All 3 of them ended up in the hospital. 2 of them were knocked out. They really, I think, attempted to kill Tiberiu, who has a reputation as an environmentalist in this region. And it was this kind of horrifying attack. And it happened actually, I think, the day after I'd arrived in Romania. So I knew that there were these risks involved. I kind of read about some of the previous attacks, and then obviously got very real very quickly, because right away there was this this major assault that resulted in all 3 of them being hospitalized.
Yeah, and that's not the only attack of that nature on environmentalists and journalists. I mean, you highlight them a little bit later. Can you talk about like the history a little bit of how frequent these attacks on people looking a little bit more into the illegal deforestation, how there is a history of that more than just the initial terrifying story that you talk about at the outset?
Yeah, there. I think the official tally, as I've seen it, is that there have been 6 murders in the last couple of years in relation to illegal logging, either forest rangers or environmentalists who've been killed, and then another 650 odd attacks of various sorts. So with bats or axes or guns or any sort of anything from attempted murder to sort of hand-to-hand brawling. But those numbers are obviously probably very low. Those are just the official tallies. I think this sort of thing is almost day in, day out for people who are in this line of work. And it's obviously it's incredibly commonplace, and it's very dangerous for those who are involved.
So let's talk a little bit about Romania as the home to the Amazon of Europe, which is an apt way, as you write, to talk about it in more ways than one. One, based on its importance environmentally, and two, the way it's been rapidly deforested. Can you talk a little bit about the history there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting history, I think, and for various reasons, the industrialization of Europe even plays a big role in this. But Romania happens to have more than half. Some estimates would put it even closer to 70% of the remaining old growth forest left in Europe, outside of Scandinavia. So this sort of temperate old growth forest. And, Europe has been heavily deforested. Obviously, I think it's less than 4% of European forest land remains intact, but Romania, for various reasons, it's far from industrial centers. It was a closed off communist state for a long time, has this incredible forest land in the Carpathian Mountains. And it's exceptionally important for a lot of reasons. One of which is biodiversity. Obviously, old growth forest is super important for maintaining that biodiversity. It's an incredibly lush ecosystem. Also important for climate reasons. The carbon capture abilities of an old growth forest outstrip any other technology that we have to do that. So it's important for a lot of reasons, and now is obviously very much in the crosshairs of the global timber market and in the furniture industry in particular. And so, since Romania joined the EU, basically this forest has been disappearing at like an astonishing rate.
Right. So, take us a little through that history back to the fall of the Soviet Union, which opened them up to privatization. I did not expect to see Harvard University and their endowment involved in this story. I mean, there are so many crazy intertwining actors in this. It just blew my mind, truly.
The Yeah, it is kind of a stranger than fiction story, but if you start from the beginning, when communism ends in 1989 in Romania, obviously all the forest land was publicly held at that point, and there's an attempt to privatize, to re-privatize some of these land holdings. And obviously this is the story in so many of these post-communist states, that like that program was marred by corruption. It was insanely addled in every way by backroom dealings and dubious actors. And because of that, a bunch of people end up buying up forest land who are, they're not Romanians, they're not even people who have any interest in forests as such. They're just people looking to make a quick buck. And one of those groups is the Harvard University Endowment, which is, one of the great institutional investors of our time. And they, not for nothing, many of the leaders of Harvard have also had close ties to the World Bank and the IMF and the organizations that cheered these sort of privatization schemes on. And they get tipped off effectively that there's a lot of land to be had on the cheap, and they start buying it up I think in 2004 they start buying up parcels, and quickly they become the largest private landowner in Romania, I think outside of the church at that point. And obviously this stuff
Now that's
is
IKEA, right? So
yeah.
so first the Harvard Endowment becomes the number one landowner in Romania, and now that's IKEA. So like how much of that was transferred over to IKEA? How much of that was sold, I should say, to IKEA?
Oh yeah, a lot. I think an overwhelming percentage of it actually is. Harvard gets in a little bit of legal trouble for their acquisition. Obviously, no surprise, a lot of these holdings were illegally acquired, or done so in such dubious fashion that actually the businessman that they were working with on the deal got a 3-year suspended sentence because of that deal. And they were looking at some legal challenges, and rather than deal with them, they just decided to sell, and the buyer, the ready and willing buyer, was IKEA. So IKEA, I think, ended up buying something like 30,000 odd hectares from Harvard, and then they've compiled more and more forest land ever since. And I think they now own about 50,000 hectares, which puts them, far and away the number one private landowner in the country.
So I mean, what makes ancient forests like these particular forests, you touched on it a bit, but the fact that it's so effective, the old growth forest is the right term, in term for carbon capture. What makes this appealing to say IKEA in terms of like, I don't know, why can't they just cut down some regular wood? I know that sounds stupid, but is it just they're because of deforestation globally, they're running out? I mean, what is the financial incentive for a major corporation like IKEA to target these really just important forests?
I think it's a couple of things. One, obviously, land is fairly cheap in Romania, and labor is very cheap, especially for in the broader EU. So you can get your hands on these forests for a pretty favorable price, and you can pay people to get the logs out of there for a pretty favorable price as well. The reality is, IKEA is the largest wood consumer on the planet. It's the largest individual wood, I think, processor and retailer on Earth. There are estimates to say that they consume at least 1% of wood every year globally. They're growing by 2 million trees a year on average, maybe even more than that now. And so they have a huge appetite. I mean, the amount of wood that they consume is just astonishing. And so they have a major investment in Eastern Europe and Russia. That's really where their supply chain is located. And so it's not like they're seeking out old growth forests in particular. Just they have such a demand for wood, and that's where they are. It just happens to be the place where this incredibly important old growth forest is also located.